Hi everyone, my name is Avital Shavit. I'm a senior manager at LA County Metro in the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. 5 really great panelists. Eve Howe from Translink, Eli Akira Kaufman from the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition, Lena Pereira from Bicycle Transit Systems, Azamat Youssef from CityMapper, and Lilly Shoup from Lyft. And I'm going to go through our presentation and have each person introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what their role is in new mobility. And I'll hand it off to Eve.
Thank you. It's so great to be here today. So I'm with Translink. I'll give you a bit of context about where I come from. We're based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll provide a bit of background. So our organization operates in the Metro Vancouver region, which covers 21 municipalities, an electoral area, and a Treaty First Nations. We're home to 2.5 million residents. Translink is an integrated transit agency, so we provide all forms of public transit integrated into one. That includes commuter rail, light rail, as shown here, bus service, C-bus, and paratransit. We're also a regional transportation authority where we work with our municipal partners to fund and deliver major road network as well as bike lane network across the region. So that's a bit of what we have. What else we have is we've been in the fortunate position in Vancouver to see growing transit ridership consistently over the past decade. The dotted blue line is our transit system. So we've been in a situation where we are trying to catch up to demand constantly. So we're very supply limited in terms of growth right now. Supply is our challenge. What we don't have is ride hailing. We're the only major city in North America that does not have ride hailing yet, but this is about to change really quickly. In September, the province started accepting license applications from ride hailing operators, and we expect that by December of this year, they'll start operations. We also don't have micromobility. Electric micromobility is not legal on our public streets anywhere in our province. There's work underway to change legislation to allow for these. And it was interesting to find out that actually it sounds like Netherlands is another area where these are not legal either. So we don't have e-scooter share. We don't have that yet. What we do have is car sharing. We're the car sharing capital of North America. We have 3,000 car sharing vehicles in operations, 4 companies, 2 return to base and 2 one-way. 2 of those car share companies are homegrown. They've been around for one of them at least, Moto, has been around for a couple of decades and has grown very organically in our region. In some areas of the city, we have 4.22 car sharing vehicles per 1,000 people. So we're very well supplied in terms of car share, and it's been growing steadily. And we also have bike share to some degree. The city of Vancouver started a docked bike share program in 2016, and that's been growing and expanding throughout the city. We've had a number of dockless bike share pilots across the region in various cities, none of which have really taken hold. The only one that is kind of in operation now is at the University of British Columbia. So that's a bit about where the context of where I come from. Just very quickly, Translink Tomorrow is the brand under which our team, the New Mobility Group, which I guess is kind of the equivalent or the small sister equivalent to the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. We bring in new ideas from the private sector, look for opportunities to pilot and partner. We've been doing a number of things, including a mobility as a service pilot, a carpool pilot, on-demand transit pilot. We're also coordinating a regional response to arrival of these shared mobility modes, such as a regional coordination in terms of licensing ride hailing. And as well, we published micromobility guidelines recently and are working on data standards for our region. So that's it for me. I'll pass it along, pass it back. Thank you.
All right, and next we have Lilly.
Great. Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for having me here today. Lilly Shoup, I'm with Lyft, and I work on public-private partnerships for the company. So Lyft's mission is really to provide the world's best transportation options, and that requires both the company to provide multimodal choices, but also to work with our city partners and state and federal partners to provide the infrastructure to support that decision-making. So really excited, a few weeks ago, we launched an app redesign of the Lyft app that puts front and center those multimodal choices. So when you open the Lyft app, you see not just shared rides and ride hailing, but you also see shared bikes, shared scooters, and public transit all available in the Lyft app. And we're really excited about the potential for this to expose more people to the various options that they have for getting around. Now we're taking that one step further. So just last week, we announced Ditch Your Car Challenge, where people around in the country in Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles can work through Lyft and our partner Carvana to actually sell their private car. And in exchange, they'll get Lyft credits and a subscription to our membership package, Lyft Pink. So we're really excited about the potential of these kinds of innovations and these kinds of partnerships to begin to change the car culture that we have in Los Angeles and around this country, and begin to have people think differently about their commutes and how they get around their communities. So really excited about the conversation.
And Lena Pereira.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lena Pereira. I am the Deputy General Manager for Metro Bike Share, and I work for Bicycle Transit Systems, which is the operator for Metro Bike Share, so we're contracted by Metro. A little bit about Bicycle Transit Systems. We're headquartered in Philadelphia. I work out of LA. Our warehouse is just kitty corner to here, actually. We specialize in operations, so everything from bike assembly, mechanics, balancing, battery swapping, dispatch, and more. Also marketing and customer service. We have 4 systems across the country, so Philadelphia, Las Vegas, Oklahoma City, and then finally LA. And about Metro Bike Share, just a little bit about the program. So it's a partnership between Metro and the city of LA. Our equipment manufacturer is B-Cycle, which is owned by Trek Bicycles. And we are station-based, so we have just over 190 stations with 1,900 bikes in Los Angeles. And we are primarily near Metro rail lines, so the Red Line, Purple, and Expo Metro lines. Also, something that makes our program unique is we have an integration between the Transit Access Pass and B-Cycle. So this is where user sign up is through tap2go.net. We do all of our user account management there, and usage fee billing, all of our data is there. And then also our pricing structure is mirrored to Metro Bus and Rail.
Right. And next, Akira Kaufman.
Hello. My name is Akira Kaufman. I'm the Executive Director of the LA County Bicycle Coalition. We're a community-based organization in Los Angeles that tries to serve all 88 cities incorporated all together. With the unincorporated, that's 107 cities. We're small but mighty staff, and we were founded about 20 years ago to help make LA streets safer, healthier, and more equitable. It's been a battle, so I'm really excited about the conversation that we're about to have today. Some of the things that we do a lot of advocacy work to try to push policy that's going to make our streets safer. We also work with groups like Metro. We do education programs with the Metro Best program. And I may have a chance to talk about that more later, or I'll just share a little bit about it now. Okay, got it. So the Metro Best program is essentially an education program to help new riders, folks who are not so steady on a bicycle, to feel more confident so that they can understand the rules of the road and feel like they can be a part of a larger culture of cycling. There's classes that have each different sort of, it's like a sequence that helps people become more roadworthy. And then we also curate rides all over the county so that people can be supported with bike marshals if you catch a flat or if you need support to feel more comfortable on a bike. And then in addition to that education program, we also work with LAUSD to help cultivate the next generation of riders, folks who will be our future transit riders, folks who will be using these different modalities because in LA, if you have a kid, as I do, it's kind of scary to allow them out on our streets on 2 wheels, let alone as a pedestrian. And so our whole thing is, how do we normalize this as really the future and their future? So we also work in LASD, we do bike encouragement programs, bike clubs, and also we're trying to get into the PE departments right now. Currently, most PE departments in Los Angeles are ball-centric. It's a baseball, it's a basketball, it's a football. And we're really trying to introduce cycling as a longer way, a lifelong opportunity to be connected to your fitness and to be connected to your community. So how many of us still play competitive baseball, football, and basketball after a certain point? But okay, some of us do. The final thing I'll say is that we also do a bunch of outreach. So currently we have the Operation Firefly program where we go out into various neighborhoods around the community. We hand out bike lights so that people are street legal. This is a program that we run during daylight savings time because we're trying to make sure that folks on the street are seen. And the highest incidence of crashes that result in injury and worse are during this period of the year. So we go out there with community leaders, electeds, and different sort of sponsored brands. Some of them are here today. And we hand out bike lights and do an education outreach program to make sure people ride safe. I guess the final thing I'll say, I know this is more time than I probably should take, is that LA is known as a car place, and yet we have this amazing Mediterranean climate, and we have this, the populace generally lives in the flats, and so there's absolutely no reason why we can't become the premier bike and active transportation pedestrian city in the world. So I'm excited about sharing our ideas from the community level. Thanks.
And last but not least, we have Asmat Youssef.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Hi, I'm the founder and CEO of CityMapper from London, the UK, so I'm really far away from home. London is another giant megacity like Los Angeles, but very, very different than LA. A place dominated by public transport where most people don't even own cars or use cars. And personally, I don't even have a driving license. So I'm enjoying surviving in Los Angeles just through using public transport and micromobility and Lyft and everything. And it's really exciting to see so much evolving here in the city around moving away from car ownership and using all these other modes of transport. Actually, I may ask, it's probably like a bad question for me to ask, but how many of you are familiar with the CityMapper app? Wow, that is way more than I thought. In London, everyone would raise their hands over here. I was just afraid nobody knows who we are because, we just don't have anyone out here. But what we've done, if you've used our app, and if you haven't, please try it out, is we started with public transport, showing you every single way to get from A to B. We've added the cabs, Lyft, micromobility options, and everything into one interface to give you the best choices of getting from A to B. And have also pioneered the work on multimodal, combining public and private modes together so you can find combined ways of also getting to your destination, all with a mindset of helping those that don't drive. So we don't do driving, we don't show you how to get somewhere in a car, but through every other means possible. What's new in our world is that we've recently launched something called CityMapper Pass, I think we call Mobility as a Service subscription, which you can subscribe to public transport, cycles, and cabs in London. It's just started in London right now. And through our application and through through a card that we have, you can basically access all the public transport in London and essentially subscribe to get unlimited mobility around the city. So we're pretty excited about that because it helps complete this product experience for people to be able to not just get from A to B, but have a complete payment system for doing so. And hope that Los Angeles also gets to a point where it becomes easy to access the metro and the buses through contactless payments. so that it becomes really easy for anyone to be able to access and use public transportation. In any case, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So, want to kind of redirect to back to our question of, Los Angeles County is a place where people come to reinvent their dreams and to write their scripts for their own movies. What does flipping the script on LA car culture look like? And in looking at my perspective at LA Metro, we recently did a strategic plan, Vision 2028, that said our goal is to double non-drive alone trips by the next 10 years. So non-drive alone trips, carpooling, shared ride hailing, walking, biking, busing, training, taking transit. Anything that isn't driving alone in your own car. So I want to ask to the group, and actually I'll start with our two non-Los Angeles folks. Do you think we're pulling the right levers in terms of policy to nudge people to try something other than driving alone? I'll start with Eve.
I think to talk about that question of getting people out of cars, I'm seeing a lot of the right things happening, more and more services being available. I see people using them. I come to LA many times, and I always think the first thing my instinct is to book a car. And then this time I realized there are so many options. I think it's hard to divorce that question of land use, though, and the importance that the role of land use really plays in supporting all these modes, because you can't really separate that. I think where Vancouver's had I think where we've come to the place where we're at now, were decisions made in the 60s and 70s to essentially not build a freeway through our Chinatown into our downtown. So we don't have freeways into downtown. It is all small streets, all lights, all congestion. And in some ways that's helped facilitate mode shifting because of the fact that it's not that convenient to drive. So the option is not that great. It's helped give us enough momentum and population and placing people in the right places. Our downtown is heavily built out with towers, apartments, condos. It's very livable. It's got lots of shops and services. So that's really helped that mode shift. And then now supplementing with new modes, which I'm excited to see how that'll transform. I think the combination of all of that is kind of what's needed to make that tipping point.
Yeah. Asmat, do you have some thoughts on levers we should be pulling?
Yeah, I think it's a great mission. I think it's very important for a city to be completely usable and functional for people without a car. And personally, I find it feasible to move around LA without a car, but to be honest with you, I think this is probably one of the hardest cities to completely provision using public transport. But I think it's great that you have a mission of doing so. I would suggest that one way to make a city truly usable is to make it very walkable. And it's hard to do in a place with a lot of highways and a lot of dead streets where you can't walk and you get stuck. And I think if LA continues to invest in walking infrastructure and then even micromobility on the back of it, and another thing I'd mention is frequency. Feels like it's not necessarily badly connected, but the frequency, i.e. of buses, could be improved. And if you do that, then people really begin to trust that they can use the infrastructure and rely on it. So you provide live data, you provide better frequency, and as long as you continue to invest in it, you can you essentially achieve this goal, which I think Los Angeles needs, which is to get people off single-person cars and reduce traffic. And so I wish you the best of luck with it.
Okay, well, we talked a little bit about, making a city more walkable and maybe improving transit frequencies. But today we're talking also about new mobility and these new options we have to get around, the scooters that are out there, the shared bikes that are out there, our existing bike share systems. So in terms of new mobility, in terms of shared cars, bikes, and scooters, how, and I'll pose this question maybe to have Eli start with this.
Sure.
How do you think we can leverage public and private sectors to work together to solve traffic? And what do you think things are working? And what do you think things we can improve? And who should do those things in terms of the public and the private sector?
Wow, it's a big question. So, well, first of all, in terms of flipping the script, I've got to just say something with that first, which is that I think as long as we allow the dominant narrative to be about being without a car, it feels like it's a subtractive kind of an approach. So I think just in terms of telling the story, it might be more useful if we start telling a different narrative about what you're gaining by instead of what you're losing. I think for most folks, it's hard to think, well, how would I lose my car? How would I take my kid to soccer practice? How would I live? How would I function in a city this big with this kind of sprawl? So I think that sort of, that whole mentality of what we're losing versus what we're gaining is something that we might want to think about. But in terms of the other question, which is multi-part itself, I think it really has to do with finding this sort of, from the perspective of the street, right now you have a bunch of people who are primarily afraid to get out by using other modes other than the car. And I think that we have to start telling that story of the people who are actually using our transit in a better and smarter way. We're a town of storytelling, and so why not start to build the narrative that says, or highlight the folks that are actually out there doing it and using these types of modalities. It feels like the stories that we hear about micromobility and about biking are all related to other cities. Even though we're the storytelling capital of the world, we're just missing what's actually currently happening. And I would argue that there are more people out on the streets walking and riding and scootering than we're giving ourselves credit for. And so once again, instead of approaching the conversation from a deficit perspective of what's not happening, I think we need to start to shine a brighter light on what is happening so that folks can start to feel like, okay, like there is a larger context, there's a larger culture that's understanding the advantages of getting out of a car and getting out on the street. So that's sort of like a larger narrative point of view on that. In terms of the private-public partnerships, lots of P's. We have to start investing in a more livable city. And we have to start seeing the intersectionality of all the issues that LA faces, from the lack of affordable housing to the problems that we have with our public schools, and how all of these things are interconnected. And I think that one of the issues that I have really confronted as the new ED is how siloed transportation is from everything else that's happening in our region. Somehow this conversation is not being included, or it's not being sort of connected well enough to all the other major issues that we're facing. And so, I think we're losing a lot of opportunities to meet and work with different types of foundations, with different types of public agencies that don't see themselves as transit related. And so really with the big push that we're doing at LACBC is, how do we start to connect our issue with all these other issues so that they can no longer be siloed? This theory of separation is really hurting our progress and getting the attention of public and private investment. And until we do a better job of connecting ourselves with these other issue areas, I think we're going to continue to be siloed and seen as not part of the greater whole. It's a huge issue for us.
Yeah. So Lilly, I'll kind of pose a similar question. You work on the private sector side of new mobility. What do you think that the private sector can be doing to advance kind of the mission and the goals of new mobility, getting people out of their cars? And what do you think the public sector could be doing to kind of partner and advance those goals together?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And just building off what Eli was just talking about, I think we really have to lead with the more choices, more options available narrative rather than forcing people out of their cars. I don't think that will resonate and won't achieve the outcomes that that we set out for ourselves. So on the private sector side, providing more options is something we can do. So working with the public sector partners and public transit agencies, we can make people aware of the options that they have before them, and we can provide those options like shared scooters and shared bicycles. So making that seamless, reliable, and customer-first approach is something that private companies like Lyft can take the lead on and can do very well. But we have to rely and have to work hand in hand with public sector agencies as they control decision making about the infrastructure. So deciding how we manage our public right-of-ways, deciding how we price, how we get around, how do we manage parking and parking supply and demand. These are all things that the public sector has to work with communities to make decisions around. And so really excited about ways we can more seamlessly integrate to make those decisions, provide the information and provide the justification for those tough choices. But at the end of the day, that's something that we really need public sector agencies like Metro or LA DOT to lead on. So excited to see how this conference and this conversation over the next 2 days can help drive that conversation here in Los Angeles.
Yeah. So Asmat, I'll kind of ask you, from your experience in London and being on the private sector side of mobility technology, like, what do you think has been successful in the global model of working with the public sector?
Sorry, just to clarify, are you talking about the private side or the public
So
side?
just in terms of, how private sector can kind of push information, technology, market ideas, and let people know about their choices, right? Your app gives people basically a menu of options and lets them know about their choices. Like, how do you think that best partners with the public sector? And, I'm just curious to hear what your successes have been working with public sector.
Yeah,
partners.
sure. I mean, our app started because of a decision that Transport for London took to open up data and choose not to build their own app, but say we're going to open up the data and we're going to let anyone build applications on top of that. And I think it was a great decision because we not only built an app, which is for free, considering it helps people in London and all the other cities use public transport. It doesn't cost the agencies anything to get us to get more people to use their infrastructure. I think it was a very good decision. So it didn't really require, I mean, to be honest, it didn't require much coordination. Open data just was a gift that was given out to the entire ecosystem to work on the back of, and that's essentially what we did. I think it's been very beneficial for all the cities that have done so. I understand, if I'm not mistaken, Los Angeles is taking a similar approach, saying we're not going to invest in our own application further. We're going to invest further in open data so that everyone out there can build applications and do so. And we've been spending the past 6-7 years continuing to iterate and improve our applications, which we can do because we're interested in doing so. That's where our expertise lies. And so that was the first phase of partnership, which was relatively hands-off. We then had a second phase, which was not so successful, where we wanted to reinvent the bus. And our logic there was that cabs have gotten smarter, and scooters are getting smarter, and cycles are getting smarter, and buses remain kind of stupid, excuse my language, but they're not actually innovating. They're not getting better, and we felt there was an opportunity to build software for buses and get them to be better resourced. However, in that particular story, the regulatory environment did not give us an opportunity to really explore that further because there is very rigid rules for buses and taxis, and in the bus world, it's hard for the private sector to really innovate and make an impact. So that was a not so good narrative of trying to work together with the public sector. I hope, even though we've stopped now trying to reinvent the bus, I hope that narrative changes and the public sector gives opportunity to other private companies to do there, because I think it's very important that the bus becomes a better experience and runs more efficiently in a city. It's existing infrastructure, it's super shared. I mean, a lot of people can use a bus if it's designed well, if it's reliable, and it has a huge impact on traffic. And then the third phase for what we're doing with ticketing right now is another positive story. I think Transport for London was again innovative in backing contactless technology in London, which for those of you that don't know means that you can use any bank card to access public transport. So you don't have to use a special card like you have here, the tap card. You can pull out any of your bank cards and tap. So you can see a bus go by and just jump on and not have to worry about payments. And I think that was a really good move by them. Again, opening up ticketing, if you like. So in the way there was open data, now there's open ticketing. And off the back of that, we've developed CityMapper Pass and bundled everything together and continued to develop this great mobile experience. So I think, the positive part of the story is that when the public sector does innovate and creates infrastructure and a system that is open for private companies, we've been successful in working on the back of that. But on certain projects like collaborating to reinvent the bus, we unfortunately were not successful in figuring out how to make progress there. But I think it continues to be very important to collaborate between us as private companies and the public sector to figure out how we can solve problems that we have in cities, because it's essential for the future of our complicated cities that we solve things like congestion and pollution and everything. And we can only do that if the public and private sector figure out how to work together.
Yeah, if I can just build on that, was one of the reasons we were so excited with the mayor's announcement this morning about urban movement labs as a way to be more collaborative between different sectors to solve real-world challenges and community challenges. I think so often in transportation, we assume we know our customers and we assume we know what the trip types and travel demands flows look like, and that's just not the case for the experience on the ground. And so getting out and talking to community members and working with community organizations is really the only way that we can drive adoption and acceptance of new mobility modes and really make sure that we're meeting the demands that people have in their actual day-to-day lives. And so this Urban Movement Labs is really an exciting way to shift that narrative and really focus on the needs of the city of Los Angeles from both sides.
So, Lily talked about giving people lots of choices, right? And information for what those choices might be instead of the choice that 70% of people in LA County make, which is to drive alone. So thinking about that, we have a lot of choices. We have an abundance of new choices in our mobility space. I want to have Lena and Eli kind of talk a little bit about, in the last 10 years, thousands of people have died on our streets due to traffic fatalities and traffic injuries. And a large majority or disproportionate amount of those folks are walking and biking. And disproportionate amount of those folks are low income. Because those are the folks that are depending on transit. In order to get to transit, you have to walk and sometimes bike there. And really the leading cause of fatalities and death for children in Los Angeles County is traffic fatalities, is cars. And I think that's something we don't look at. And we can give a menu of options to people, but if people don't feel safe or are safe, we need to think about those menus. So I want to pose a question to Lena and then Eli. Do you think that our city's infrastructure is currently supporting all new modes that we have in this new mobility world? And what do you think the role of public agencies should be in making the road safer for all users?
Yeah, so we know that our streets should be more safe, and the current infrastructure doesn't support, in LA, doesn't support safe bike riding in most places. What we hear from, when we administer a survey annually, we hear from people that take Metro, that don't take Metro, use the bikes, don't use the bikes. It's a very diverse pool, and always the number one response is people don't feel safe riding, that they like the program, it's maybe not near their house, so that's an equity issue, and maybe they need to understand better how it works as well, but ultimately the number one reason is because they don't feel safe. So absolutely, it's something we need to improve in. And I would say faster. That's our perspective. We want public agencies to get more involved and do it faster.
Yeah, I would agree with faster for the public agencies to get better infrastructure in that's more human-centered. I mean, the big problem with LA is that it's speed. People drive too fast here. It's a huge issue. We're in such a hurry to be in traffic that by the time we get out of traffic, folks are just gunning their cars, and that's where that's why there's so much risk. That's why there's so many crashes, and we don't call them accidents in the coalition because we think these things are not accidental. We don't think these moments are not accidents. These are crashes that are the result of choices that people are making on a daily basis, and also distracted driving is another issue that we hear a lot about and we witness as the riders of these streets. So, to the extent to which we can start to help people slow down across the board, but especially when they get in a car, that's a critical, like just philosophically, that's where we need to begin. We need to have people drive more slowly, and we need to make sure that we focus on folks not feeling like they have the agency to use their devices. There was a preschooler who was walking to school in K-Town, Koreatown for those of you who are not from here, and she was killed in a car crash. Totally avoidable. Their infrastructure was not supporting a safe commute to school. We have these programs called Safe Routes to Schools that we work with LADOT, and not to call out LADOT or Metro, but it's kind of a misnomer to describe safe routes to school when we have the incidents of injury and death on our streets. So to whatever extent that we can avoid or limit things like right-hand turns, which allow folks to keep their speed up as they take that turn, putting pedestrians and cyclists and scooters at risk. There's some simple things that we can start to do in the way that we educate our drivers on how to share space. The last thing I'll say is that, if you take the DMV test in California, and you'll see that there's very little that has to do with anything around pedestrianism or bicycles. I don't know if there's anything from scooters in there yet. There should be. But it allows this dominant culture to think that it's the only game in town. And as long as we allow that to persist, that the assumption is that you're going to get behind the wheel of a car, that notion or that attitude that that folks can go fast and not be aware or concerned of others on the road that they share is going to persist. So speed and distracted driving would be the two key things that I think we really need to start addressing from the time people start to think about mobility in elementary school. You need to start explaining that speed kills.
Yeah. Would anybody else like to talk about safety and what you think? I mean, especially to our two guests from out of town. What are some things that London and in Canada you're doing that you think are improving outcomes for people on the street and their safety?
Well, I can add a bit to that. I mean, we've been in the city of Vancouver. They've been focusing on improving bike mobility, bike lanes throughout the downtown core. One of our bridges, so our downtown's a peninsula that's kind of locked by, I think it's 3 bridges that access it. On one of the bridges, they took a car lane away and converted it to bike lane. And now you see so much more usage. Personally, I'm kind of a big chicken when it comes to cycling in mixed traffic. I just won't do it. After experiencing the new lanes in the heart of downtown, it feels so much safer. I would bring my kids on that, and we're seeing more cycling than ever downtown and as well across that bridge. It was politically challenging to convert road space, take road space away for bikes. But I think after the smoke faded, it was, I think it's deemed quite successful and has increased ridership. So, infrastructure.
What cities like London and Paris are going through is really a massive congestion challenge, especially right in the center, which if you like is similar to what New York City is going through. It's become incredibly essential to find ways of getting cars, especially single-person cars, out of the center. And so Paris, for example, has over the years even gotten rid of streets and highways and brought in more walking districts like on the river, and begin to really encourage and incentivize people to leave their car behind. And they've got a very open system right now, which are encouraging micromobility and everyone to come in. So there are alternatives right in the center. And it's kind of existential. If this doesn't happen, then you're just going to have completely gridlocked streets. And I know Los Angeles has a different version of that at a mass scale, but in tiny European cities, when you have gridlock, you're pretty much just stuck on these tiny streets. And so I think part of the solution to this, apart from encouraging shared use mobility like buses and public transport, I think we've got to reimagine streets in some way. We've got this age-old infrastructure of roads and pavements, and we're kind of missing something in between that perhaps should exist, where you can have cycles and scooters and everything. And now, and cycle lane infrastructure is kind of what that is, and beginning to be. And I was just speaking to my colleague about how even in London we have this great investment in cycle lane infrastructure, and cycling is still so dangerous that anybody that does so is really taking a risk. You do it, and I think it's really important for cities to figure out a way to make non-car modes safer. For it to definitely feel safe to cycle and walk and take a scooter. I've been taking a scooter around downtown LA, and it doesn't feel safe, or maybe it's just my scooter skills. But if the infrastructure improves, then this is basically how you get people to cars. So this is happening in Europe. European cities are doing a lot to do so, and I think even though Los Angeles is geographically a very different type of city, I think partly it could follow some of the same script.
So I heard a little bit about protected bike lanes and how you rode the highly protected lane that's out on Alameda. So if you haven't seen that, go and ride it or walk it. But Eli, one of the things we have in Los Angeles is when we think about where we might want to put a protected lane, that means a trade-off. We might have to, take away a lane of either parking or a car vehicle travel lane. What do you think, what kind of conversations do we need to be having with communities, and do communities need to be having with their elected or other stakeholders to start talking about that? Because there's a lot of places that if we want to make a change, there is going to be a trade-off. And that trade-off, what do you envision those conversations should look like, and how should they happen?
Oh, and well, so I'm a pretty grassrootsy kind of a person. So I think it's culture and community based. So there's there's growing movement of grassroots groups, like Sunset for All is an example of one. This is a community-based group that's trying to create a better infrastructure along Sunset, which is a major car thoroughfare, but it's also a major public space where people have the right, or should have the right, to move around that street more safely. So I think it's a grassroots, we have to figure that out. Some of the impediments to it are, businesses feel like if they lose parking spaces, they lose business. And we need to make the financial and economic sort of case for how actually removing one parking space to replace it with better parking opportunities for bicycles or other modes of transportation, it's actually going to increase the type of business that's happening on those main streets. The fear of losing customers who are car dependent is huge in Los Angeles. And so that whoever cracks that ability or creates that narrative to have people understand, well, actually, if we get more people walking, moving more slowly, back to speed kills people, but it also kills business. There's so many drive-through cities. If you look at Inglewood and all these towns in the southeast cities of Los Angeles, they're just drive-through towns. People are getting from point A to B and trying to get as fast through these communities as possible. Well, that pulls out a lot of opportunities for business to happen. And so the more we can slow people down and get away from this car culture and get them to actually connect with each other and their neighborhoods and buy locally, like the better off those communities are going to be. If you drive up the Highway 5, Interstate 5, just a quick thing, And if you've ever done that, there are these car towns, there are these gas towns, and if you were to take a picture of them, there's no sidewalks, there's no flower beds, there's no places for people to interact with each other. You literally don't have to get out of your car. You drive to the gas station, you get your gas, you drive up to the motel, you have 3 steps, you're inside, you turn on the TV. The less amount of time you can spend outside interacting with your environment, kind of like that's the design of those spaces. Versus great bike cities, where people are actually able to communicate and connect with each other. They're going to slow down a little bit more and maybe buy a cup of coffee and maybe do a little bit of shopping. I think this idea that I have to have this vehicle in order to do business, we have to overcome that somehow. In Los Angeles, because of the sprawl and the size of it, it's an easy excuse for us to not just try a different mode. So yeah, I mean, I think we need to really make the economic case for slowing down, getting out of our cars, and interacting with our communities.
Great. So if you want to learn about how you can be a stakeholder, talk to Eli afterwards. He has a lot of good tips for that. In terms of how we're encouraging people to have those conversations in their community, and also try new things in this menu of choices that we're hopefully giving them with new mobility, I know that my company will actually subsidize you to park in our building $50 a month. Now I'm telling secrets. But I don't get $50 if I bike to work a month. And so I feel like that's a little unfair, considering also the risk I need to take to bike to work in Los Angeles. But so I want to kind of have everybody answer the question of, are we pricing and incentivizing all modes of transportation effectively and appropriately and equitably towards our transportation and environmental goals? And maybe you can talk about Vancouver and how you're doing it and how it's successful and maybe how we can learn from it.
Sure. I think, I mean, yes and no. I think in terms of transit and sort of our fare rates and such, we have a lot of programs out there working with employers to try to get subsidized transit. We have a U-Pass system where university students all get essentially monthly passes that are included as part of being registered at the university. So we have a number of programs that tries to keep transit pricing quite accessible. I think with ride-hailing arriving, one of the things that has been put into law is that the flag fare has to be equal to a taxi flag fare, which is above a transit fare as a base fare, so that it's never cheaper to hop in a vehicle when you can take transit. I'm curious to see when micromobility arrives. Generally, it is quite cost effective. And the question will be, how sustainable is that? Should government be stepping in to ensure that those prices are low and that the companies are viable to stick around? So yeah, no, I think it's kind of an ongoing question. I think that exact example that you give, we still have examples where it's free to park. A lot of employers offer free parking, subsidized parking, and I think that conversation needs a bit more of a stick to get that push to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think I agree with the conversation we were just having around business incentives and talking about the economic imperative as well as the environmental and social for these changes that we're talking about. If you look at cities that have growing transit ridership and growing economies, is that part of the reason that you see young talent moving to those places, or see something that is driving an economic boon? And maybe that isn't because they offer free parking at the employment centers, but because they have great transit options to get around. So if you look at somewhere like Seattle or Washington, D.C., or Nashville, Tennessee, or here in Los Angeles, people are moving to certain places within the region because of the transit options that they have. And I think capitalizing on that and telling that story can be a really powerful way to connect with an audience about the importance of transportation choices and infrastructure changes that we need to see.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes people don't realize the great options that they have in the public transport options that they have. They don't consider them while moving around, and I think just helping educate people on what is already there is already a good incentive. Public transport is cheaper, and when it works, it's very effective. So I just think a city has to continue to provide more choices, which is happening, more mobility options to folks, and then hopefully apps like us can help discover the infrastructure that already exists. Beyond that, if the question is about incentives, I think the city has the ability to try and model incentives around whatever it feels it wants to promote in the particular city. But incentives are not always just economics. They're also just about ensuring that something is trustworthy and reliable, which means you've got to provide good choices, infrastructure, reliability, and make them discoverable.
Yeah. I think for us at Bicycle Transit Systems, so we have a unique perspective in LA because we're contracted by Metro, so it's a collaboration between private and public, and I feel really fortunate that our pricing structure is mirrored with bus and rail, and what we hear is that it's affordable. It encourages people to ride. And then also because we're linked up with the Transit Access Pass with TAP, we're able to piggyback on those different rider classes, so reduced fares, low-income passes. So I think that we're just scratching the surface. There's still more to be done, but it's very well received, I would say, in LA. And we just need to be in more places. We're only in those few places I mentioned earlier, like along a lot of the rail lines, but we should be in more underserved areas.
So I've had this conversation so often, and I know in the conversations that I'm having, I hear a lot, you couldn't pay me to get on a bike in LA. You couldn't pay me to ride Metro or get on a bus. This is like a common theme that I encounter. So incentives are good, I think, but once again, it comes back to infrastructure from our perspective. Just we have to have safer, more equitable streets. It's pretty basic. Without the pressure that we apply as mobility advocates and as people who are innovators out in the space, without the pressure that we're applying to the public sector to actually create human-centered streets so that we can all move around more equitably, more healthily, in a more coherent, connected way, all these solutions feel like gimmicks from the perspective of the advocates in Los Angeles, I would say. We need to apply the right kind of pressure so that this is not a nice to have kind of conversation, but that we sort of open the floodgates so that we reinvent our streets to actually reflect the needs of the people that live here. And as LA becomes bigger and more impacted, they can continue to build freeways until the cows come home. We're just going to fill those freeways up with the same kind of thinking of people being single occupancy drivers, right? So we got to build better infrastructure so we can stop having the conversation of you couldn't pay me to get on Metro, you couldn't pay me to get on a bike.
And with that, I want to open up questions from the audience. And do we have somebody with a mic to go out to the audience for those questions? Great. There's one right there.
I'll just shout a bit. Oh, there we go. I'm Tom Putnam from Beeline. There's been, you actually touched on this a minute ago, Eli, with this safer routes thing. There's been loads of talk today about changing infrastructure, which is great, but it obviously takes a lot of political will, time, money, takes away streets from drivers. We look at how we can use routing to keep people on bikes and scooters safer just by sending them down quiet streets. We see loads of potential there. Have you got any thoughts on ways we can more intelligently use the existing infrastructure to divide people up, keep them safer, in the meantime while those infrastructure changes are coming?
Is that directed at?
Is there a question in there?
Using existing infrastructure?
So ways that can use the existing infrastructure in more intelligent ways. So like ways we can divide different types of transit up. So send bikes in one place and cars in another place without having to tear up the streets.
Gotcha, yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple things, two things I want to mention. One is, and this is more like a car holiday that we have in Los Angeles, but CicLAvia, if you're familiar with it, is this amazing community event where they shut down major corridors and they open it up to all modes of walking, biking. It's a fabulous thing. Hundreds of thousands of people over the years have gone out to these things. And what it does is it allows you to sort of imagine a future where we're not so car dependent and where we can actually connect with each other and traverse the city in a more, with just in a better way, for lack of a better term. Another thing that can really be done, I think that's been successful in New York and other cities is just using paint. Just creating super low barrier to entry types of like reimagining of a current street. By painting lanes and by creating baller sort of setups that would allow, these aren't class 1 bike lanes, but these are just ways of sort of reimagining the current space through paint. There's stuff that's happening up in Oakland, California too that's pretty interesting with the scrappers, from those of you who are coming from the Bay. But in LA, we just have to have a little bit more courage to repaint our streets so that folks feel like, wow, that's an opportunity to get on a scooter. That's an opportunity to walk, and that's an opportunity to get on a bike. So that would be the cheapest, lowest barrier to entry thing, combined with the CicLAvia sort of type of open street events where people can start to see what the future might look like if we changed our minds about how we get around.
I'm Eric Brune with Kuti Group in Helsinki.
Can you speak a little louder?
I'm Eric Brune with Kuti Group in Helsinki, and living there, I have to say that one big difference is you actually have a higher level government that's cooperative. We all sit around and we agree with a lot of these policies we should do, and then you have like absolutely no cooperation with higher levels and a lack of funding. And I think until we get some more political strength to get investment, you're going to be stuck. And I will say one more difference. When they expanded streetcars in Helsinki, it has a high population growth rate. They bring the extension out before the new buildings are done as a signal it's going to be there. Whereas in Philadelphia, where I lived for 20 years, people are furious. You know, they changed the zoning, but there's no increase in transit, but a huge increase in population. So no wonder people oppose things like densification. So that's my comments more than questions.
Yeah.
We have time, I think, for one more question. One more question?
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm from BMW Group Design Works, and I just want to phrase it. So it seems like there's an elephant that should be in the room that maybe isn't. And it's that when I look at Los Angeles and I try to compare it to Vancouver or London, right, the other cities represented on this stage, maybe the top level difference is that LA runs significantly fewer service hours of public transit per capita than those two cities, right? And so we talk about giving people choices. We talk about how we want to influence them and what we want them to do and be able to do. But we don't usually talk about actually giving them a quantity of something, right, to be able to access. So, you know, this is for Los Angeles in particular, but how can we address that landscape? How can we fix that? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I'll address it from the public transit side. Right now, we're in the midst of a huge study called NextGen to look at how we can better utilize our existing resources of service hours to our bus network. We're using cell phone data and location-based services data, using big data and comparing it to our existing TAP and ridership data to look at where we really have the biggest need, and so we can allocate and put more frequent headways and more frequent service on the places that are really at need. And we're looking at where we could actually potentially add service that would really be needed and used and utilized to increase ridership, because we do want to meet that goal of doubling non-drive alone trips in the next 10 years. And part of that is actually making a more robust and higher efficiency bus network. 70% of our riders and customers use the buses, not actually the trains. The train is actually a small minority of our riders. It's the buses that really drive LA. and I'll open it up. Anybody else want to talk about, what do we do about transit?
Well, I would just say that I think in a city like Los Angeles, unlike London or Vancouver, we are a polycentric city. So we don't have a core downtown where the majority of employment is. Actually, the majority of LA's employment is along the 405 freeway. So I think in a city like Los Angeles, having the next-gen bus network really prioritize those high-density corridors where the bus network needs that high-frequency service, and new mobility modes and micro-mobility modes can really plug in the gaps to give you the access of that first last mile to get there. So in a city like Los Angeles, I think it's actually the most exciting to see these public and private modes work together to provide a mobility system that is more seamless and reliable than the current one.
And with that, I'll thank all of my terrific guests and panelists, and a big round of applause for them. And thank you for being here today.